is there a project or something that maybe you yourself or you and a couple of friends would have ever thought about getting off the ground?
Yeah, I think a really a really fun documentary exploring spiritual warfare, I think would be really cool.
Yeah.
Um, I could spend 250 grand on that. If I'm
Unpack that.
talking a
Go
little,
follow that rabbit hole.
sure. Um, it would just be really nice to. I think there's been, well, certainly in my life, I've had more of a connection with the reality of spiritual warfare, something I didn't think was overly real in the sense that it's real that me and you are talking right now. And over the
Okay.
last 5 to 10 years, I think my view on that has really changed, and I find it fascinating, especially the psychology of fallen angels, their allegiance to hierarchy, even though they're fallen, how it relates to church hierarchy.
Hmm.
And I just find it fascinating. It's so plausible. And
Mm-hmm.
I have a bit of an infatuation with watching every single Catholic exorcist podcast online.
Oh boy.
So
Yeah.
I think I would dig into that and try
Mm-hmm.
and make a, hopefully an accessible but interesting and fascinating documentary. I spend 250K on that. Now, if I was being purely selfish and just spending it on whatever I wanted,
Hmm.
I'd probably book some deep sea submarine ride, or I would buy a ticket to go to space, because space and the ocean
Yeah.
are so magnificent and terrifying at the same time for me. So if I purely had no other, I didn't
Totally.
have to make the money productive,
Yeah. Yeah.
I would do something like that.
Why space or deep ocean? Sounds like maybe a childhood memory there or a story.
Yeah, I find it fascinating because it's so little is known, and
Mm-hmm.
it's so vast. And I don't know, vast things point to, I think, a curiosity in all of us, certainly
Mm-hmm.
in me.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I would like to explore that kind of desire, that thrill to see the unknown even more. Yeah.
I think I'm the same way. That sense of, I w- if I could have any wish sort of granted, it would actually be to be about like 2 inches tall. Tall. That's it.
Yeah.
So that the world itself would become so much bigger. Not that it needs to be; it's already massive. But
Yeah.
it's for me. It's partly the ability. I would love the ability to like. There's so many like little games that come out now where you're actually the size of a mouse or a small thing, and the world has become absolutely gigantic and massive
Mhm.
around you, and you can end up seeing so much more detail and so on. But that sense of being on the edge of the abyss of
Yeah.
the vastness of the universe. And so here, okay, this is funny, right? With a lot of modern culture, people use that feeling of standing at the edge of the vastness of the universe and staring out at it, and they'll use that as a sense of how can I matter at all, or how can anything like religion be real in the face of such vast, maybe brutal and blinding vastness? How can
Mm.
anything that I think be real? And I think it's funny how some of us who are Christians can go the other route and be like, this is an even more awesome. It just is it's a consolation that I'm involved in something
Mhm.
so much bigger than me. What goes through
Yeah.
your mind as you think of that sort
Yeah.
of
I
thing?
think having like an egocentric position, it's less plausible to me when you look at how finite our lives are. You know, we all
Mm-hmm.
don't live very long if you look at human history, and then you add the vastness to that of things we don't know. So I just think it's more plausible to assume that we fit into a story bigger than ourselves, that God is real, that we should embrace, or I should embrace, a certain humility towards things that are vast and that I don't know. And it's also, those UFO posters that,
Mm-hmm.
I believe, or, those
Yeah.
different posters you've seen.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just more fun, truly, like more fun and
Yeah.
honest
Mm-hmm.
to look at the vastness of what we don't know and say, I choose to believe, I choose to believe something greater. I choose to go on an adventure. Yeah, that's kind of what jumps out at me. And I think that, for how much order we see in creation itself that we kind of stumble upon as we learn more things, I think it just gives further justification for an ordered intelligence, for a unified God. And I've always thought that, but I know that's a real difficulty for some, because their brain goes the other way. And I think it maybe has something to do with personality or how we perceive the world and background, because I don't know why the same stimulus can create such vast separations in what the cause is, or an atheist or theist position. Yeah, I don't really know. What do you think?
That is interesting. I'm half thinking that there's a thought that's sort of budding, which is kind of interesting now, which is, so you're familiar with what is this thing called? It's in quantum physics, quantum study. The observer effect, right? Which is the mere act of observing a specific study at the quantum level disrupts or affects the outcome of what it is you're studying, because attention itself is far more powerful than we realize. And so I'm kind of wondering if we don't recognize perhaps the power of the observer effect, because we are part of the things that we are studying. And this sense that we like to cultivate as part of the scientific method, which is an insanely valuable thing to do, which is to try to observe all of the things that are true, irrespective of my engagement or involvement with them, and then to be able to decide on that, or to adjust my life according to a truth that manifests itself to me in a way that I can't run away from. But at the same time, I think you get then that's sort of that one side that looks out and you think you see maybe a very depersonalized, dehuman cosmos, universe setup. But then you go the other side and you have one different maybe axiom that goes maybe, a loving God created everything, or I am a part of this universe, not just like a parasitic polyp on the edge of a rock somewhere in the blackness, but I'm actually here and I mean something, and I don't have the full picture yet, but all of this can be something that we can communicate with each other. And I guess what I'm saying is it could be a matter of personality. I think that's part of it. I wonder if it's a matter of like message, how you relate to the thing. But I wonder if it's also a matter of like how you choose to observe and put facts together. So here's this funny thing, right? I was walking home, last year, and it's funny how your brain will filter out stuff that you decide is not helpful to you, and your brain does this all the time because that's how we have to get through every day. And I remember going on a walk with my wife. It's about midday, and we're walking around the neighborhood, and then all of a sudden I remembered, I forgot to put the trash cans out, because I heard the squeal of the brakes of the trash truck driving in the distance. And so I booked it back home and I pulled out the trash can, and then I ran back to where she was. And in a moment of running back, all of a sudden I noticed all of the trash cans lining all the streets. I had not seen it before. Like if you had told me everybody had at exactly 30 seconds ago wheeled out their trash cans at the same time, I would have probably believed you. Yeah. Because my brain had completely, they were there, but not seen them at all, because they didn't fit how I was trying to engage with the environment at the time, which purely was sunlight's beautiful. I'm walking with my wife. This is a good day. So many things happening at work. You don't see any of the stuff that don't fit or matter what you're up to. Yeah. What do you think about that? Because I think that's in there too.
Yeah, I think, maybe that's a better word than personality. It's more like we have this ability to be selective. So there needs to be the right stimulus for us, our brain, to select the right thing to focus on, which then gives way to more learning, or unlearning as well. But I think that's super plausible. And I can relate to that in my life. I've been selectively focused on things, usually that serve me. and whatever thing I'm fascinated about at the time. And then that's where I think the Christian story is so compelling, and the truth is that it kind of breaks through that, and it shows you your own limitations on your selective biases, because you have to go to such a first humility, and you have to kind of approach God with this deep sense that you know little, and that the world is so much bigger than you. And from there, I think that's where the journey gets really exciting, at least for me, because when I was focusing on just my own selective biases, probably it would be the most accurate thing would be that my selective bias was for hedonism, of just getting a sense of fulfillment in things that I felt worthwhile in the moment, not assuming what my future self would appreciate and want, but just what my current state in life, what I would want in that moment. And I find that it was realizing the limitations of hedonism that opened up my heart again to a reversion towards my Catholic faith, towards a deep sense that God is calling me outside of myself, and it's in forgetting myself that I'm going to actually awaken to this new life, of which we can experience some of it in the human condition on this earth.
No, that sounds like there's a story there. So I think if I'll just sort of recap that part of this
Sure.
conversation, it sounds like the story that you live, or the story that you have, is going to call out of your environment the things that you're going to pay attention to. And if your story is too narrow, you're going to miss a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
I think, like you mentioned, spiritual warfare at the beginning. I think that there are parts of the modern story that aren't trying to include enough of the data, enough of the stuff that's out there. And so I'm fascinated, just like you, with all of the pieces, all of the cards, that are on the table that a lot of people don't want to pay attention to. Like I'm fascinated, like you said, the UFO stuff. That's just always been what does that mean? Does that mean about the world? What does that mean about my faith? Weird sightings of crazy stuff outside the edge of what's normal and safe, and mythology, and these sorts of things. So I'm looking for the kind of story that allows me to be able to pay the most amount of attention to what it makes up the world. Partly because I've got this compulsive desire to I want to understand everything. I want to know everything, which can be a good thing, can be a bad thing. But if your story isn't big enough or isn't broad enough to accept all the details or the data, I think that you will blinker yourself and you will miss. And then you end up, like you said, with the confirmation bias of accepting and only being able to see things that reinforce how you want to live with the world. But it sounds like you've got a story. Like you keep referencing, hedonism, and then kind of life breaking in and turning you around a little bit. Can you share some of that?
Yeah, no, for sure. Really struggled with addiction in my early 20s. Substance abuse of various sorts. I think the desire underneath all of that was to go on an adventure. To be honest, I was chasing the fulfillment of all desire, the passions completely inflamed. And
sounds like you were going through a hard time.
Yeah,
Things weren't
absolutely.
being met, and I imagine a lot of that was a response to what you were going through at the time. So it sounds like it was a hard time.
Yeah, it was a difficult time. And so for whatever reason, I don't know if we have long enough to unpack all of it, but
We're good. Go for it.
Okay. But yeah, I definitely had a predisposition of sorts to fall into addiction. And I think a lot of young men do, in various sorts. And it stole about a good 4 or 5 years of my life. And it essentially was hedonism. And it wasn't until I hit my breaking point that God in his mercy sufficiently humbled me to need him, to be aware that I need him above all else. And so, that led me through a recovery journey. And then, this is the ultimate grace from God for me personally in my personal life is sobriety. That virtue of sobriety. It's such a powerful thing for me because it frees me from myself. And so that's kind of why I brought up hedonism, and that's why that's definitely how my story was shaped. I felt like I had the skill set and the abilities to seek all that the world had to offer. And once I had it all, I found myself lower than I've ever been, and in a darker place than I've ever been, and completely alone, essentially strangled by myself.
Those are
A
powerful
self-inflicted chaos, right? And I'm happy I went through that now, because it's made me realize my own limitations, the finitude of life, so to speak, and the greatness of God. And how the adventure that I tried to use by fueling my passions was my ignorant, naive plea to go on the adventure that God calls all of us to, right?
Why did you want an adventure so much? I mean, there are some people who are perfectly happy for life to be what it is, and I get the sense you and I are cut from the same cloth. Like, there has got to be more than just these four walls. Like,
Yeah, that's kind of, I don't really think that's true. I think
yeah,
I think we all desire adventure. I feel that things happen along the road for all of us that either progressively pull us away from that sense of dream, that sense of adventure, and pull us into ourselves. Or there are things that allow us to dream and have more adventure more. I think that the sense of adventure is alive and well in all of us. It's just it's like a volume dial of it's either turned way down or can be turned way up. And I think that when you look at people's origin stories, family origin stories, trauma, all of this stuff, it kind of, that stuff really has an impact on us. And I think our ability to dream and to chase adventure. But I do think that's a universal axiom of sorts, that every human soul desires to go on an adventure. Yeah.
how would you define adventure? I like how you're talking about this. How would you define it?
Well, I think it's a journey, number one. So there is a progression. There's a certain striving and moving forward. Pursuit of the unknown would be a big part of my definition of adventure. And that you go down this journey and find you've changed because what you've been surrounded by, the experiences you've had, the people you've met, the supernatural experiences you've had have shaped you. They've left a mark on you. And I think adventure also needs to have a small piece of the puzzle of this idea that to stand still is ultimately going to hurt and take away from that adventure which you seek. There is some sort of progression to this. I think I botched that definition entirely, but that's my best stab at what I think are some of the things that inform my view of what adventure is,
Yeah.
But it
I
is
like it
moving
well.
forward, and it is it's into the unknown,
Mhm.
it's like into the
Mhm.
breach, you know?
Yeah. You know what I think is so cool? While you're talking, I'm thinking about what a contemplative monk might say, sitting in one place and not doing anything, right? And then
Hmm.
realizing, actually, wait a second, no, that's probably not the right way to think about it. I'm thinking of, you know, how Albert Einstein says there's two ways of looking at life. You are either moving around in everything, or you are
Right.
absolutely still and everything is moving around you, right? And depending on your frame of reference, you can't prove either one is true or something like that, or you can't
Hmm.
disprove them or something like this. Um, I'm just thinking you can either be running into the future or you can be still and letting the whole future run backwards through you.
Yeah.
And I think contemplatives are people who realized if I actually let go and calm down a minute, I can let what life is flood through me
Yeah.
and I can open up to it,
Hmm.
which ends up being exactly the same experience.
Yeah. And I don't mean like progression as some sort of like physical body action word of I'm
Hmm.
going to go get the
Yep.
job or do the thing. It can include that. But I would say that the monastic tradition and, the contemplatives show us like they plunge the depths of what adventure is.
Hmm.
It's like, I think the practice of meditation and mental prayer,
Hmm.
can be probably the most fulfilling adventure any human person can go on. Because it's the hardest, right?
Yeah.
It's
So
the
say
it's the
more,
most
right?
difficult.
Somebody following a similar journey to what you've been on,
Yeah.
and now to be saying something like that, like where is a gateway to potentially the greatest adventure. Like, bro, how did you put those together? Like,
Yeah, I don't know. I maybe it's a love for the mystics.
yeah.
I I'm just fascinated by what I hold as the biggest truth in my life, what shapes my decisions, and then also what people use to make their decisions. I find it a fascinating topic. And
Hmm.
so, but I like simple things that I find are simple and true.
Hmm.
I'm not some great philosopher, and I'm just making a start of my journey. But I do love those simple truths of your perspective dictates your reality. You know, our perspective, our ability to hone in either on gratitude or, to also struggle as well and be prone to depression and all of these things. I think there's a
Hmm.
certain amount of personal agency that comes out, and that is the action verb. That is the call to action. That's what takes you into adventure or into yourself and away from
Hmm.
adventure.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't really know if I'm going where you were prompting me, but
No,
that's kind of what
it's all
what
good.
comes to mind.
Yeah, no, it's all good. You used the phrase again, plumbing the depths when you were talking about
Hmm.
contemplative or monastic orders. I was chatting with a nun 2 weeks ago. We were doing a short recording for my Smart Catholics project. We were talking about the genius of the Carmelite order and stuff, and by the end, she was laying out, here's how we see life, and anybody can follow this. And so I asked her, well, what's the difference then between, like, why do I need to go be a Carmelite? Why can't I just go do this on my own,
Hmm.
or anybody? And she says, well, you can. But the genius of, or the reason for a Carmelite order is that these are people who decided publicly, what did she say? She's like, I publicly commit to becoming a specialist in
Yeah.
these disciplines, in these
Hmm.
virtues. And for better or for worse, I'm going to hold myself up as our culture needs examples of what it looks like to live these things in a intentional, constant way. And I'm setting myself up to be judged by the whole human family, by, how well myself and my other brothers and sisters in this community are trying to live this out together. And I'd never thought of a religious order as a community of people intentionally like trying to set an example or trying to live out a path as a way to show themselves and others, here's what life can be like if you put 100% focus on these specific ways of being. That was a little bit of a side
No,
tangent.
no, I
But
get that.
that sense, like you're saying, of plumbing the depths. And I think this kind of leads into a little bit of what you're saying about spiritual warfare, which means, I mean, you've hinted at this now a couple of times, specific experiences that have broadened your sense of, I don't live in a universe big enough, or I've perhaps constrained myself. And then the universe keeps breaking in, and I now need a much deeper, wider sense of what this world is, and I have to change myself to respect it, to adapt to it, to learn how to play this. The game is now different or something. Sounds like there's some stories there. What's going through your mind?
Yeah, also I would say a lot of it is back to personality as well. Like I'm a creative type. I speak circularly. I love finding parallels and metaphors and things, and to very intense intellectual or rationalist. I might sound completely bonkers, but I do see parallels in this, in these kind of statements of plunging the depths and going on the adventure, and how you can have the biggest adventure just staying put, being with our Lord in meditation. Yeah, I just find it's a fascinating thing. For what I experienced is that, as I've mentioned on my recovery journey, that couldn't have happened but by the grace of God. I felt so many things change in me internally, where almost nothing exteriorly changed in my life. And that's where I find that the important work for me is to try and plunge the depths and try and be honest and try and grow and try and serve others better instead of serving myself, because the exterior reality that we kind of show to everyone of this is what I do, and this is what I'm known for, this is my identity, my place in the world, I do think has a secondary importance to our primary transformation, our primary adventure, which we all go on by virtue of plunging the depths of our own heart and trying to make sense of the universe, trying to make sense of God, trying to make sense of ourselves and our place in respect to others and God as well. So that's kind of the things that I don't know if I have a particular story of that, but either than maybe my first experience with meditation. I remember it was a sunny day. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this thing. I had been familiar with my family background of just, saying the prayers, right? But I just grabbed a coffee. I sat in my balcony. The sun was shining down. It was an early spring day up here in Canada, just starting to get warm. And I just practiced breathing, I just started to breathe. And I tried to be okay with the reality that my mind is completely fractured and thinking about 1,000 things. And I just tried to practice acceptance in that state. That to me was like a transformative experience that changed the way I view my own prayer life, Wow. And that would be a story that kind of pins to, I guess, the way I see the world.
That's very cool. I remember the first time that I ever tried practicing meditation totally on my own. I'd just gotten my first job. I had to drive 2 hours from Maryland and then crash on a friend's couch, and then drive over to the local Food Lion and buy sandwich fixings at 6 a.m. to get myself some breakfast, and then head over for that first day. And probably that evening or something, I thought, I'm going to try this. I don't have a sense of a prayer life. I mean, I'll pray all the prayers and I'll do all the rituals, and I'll do the religion stuff, but I myself don't have anything where if nobody's looking, I'm just on Netflix.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting down. He had one little room in his little 2-bedroom apartment, and one room was totally unfurnished. So I went in there and I closed the door, and he was out. And I just remember it being a blue night or something. All the lights were off. And there was a line that I found in a book later that described what I think I experienced. And it said, presence is the texture of the soul.
Oh,
I,
that's so good.
I love that line, right? And so I'm sitting there, I'm just kind of cross-legged, just sitting against, the crook of the door, and just doing the same thing, breathing, trying not to actually pray because my mind likes to run away to prayers as a way to distract from trying to be present, right? It's such an easy thing to do. And then I remember this very distinct sense of presence, and it felt like almost like a bubble, maybe probably on my left side, kind of sort of pressing in. And I thought, I am making this up. But then thinking about it years afterwards, realizing no, presence is the texture of a soul.
That's amazing.
I think it was a good thing. Now, I've totally sucked at meditation, since, but I'll you try to sit outside in the mornings, for 20 minutes or something and watch the sunrise come up and just be quiet and not think and just breathe, practicing that acceptance that you talked about. But
Yeah, it's profound. And I love the time that we are alive. I really think that we've seen so many pendulums shifts, and I think there's a deep yearning in our world, at least for friends. I'm seeing it happen all the time
yeah,
up here in Canada, of just people desiring more, asking big questions about why is the culture the way it is, why am I the way I am, starting to get more, taking their life a little bit more seriously and having this overwhelming desire for authenticity, and they're finding it in a theist worldview. They're finding it in going to church. They're finding it in, finding a spouse and getting married and taking on responsibility and all of this. And I just feel it's happening everywhere, because I really do think it's true that we have been living in a culture of death of sorts for a while. And there's a profound loneliness, a profound isolation. We've had more than we've ever had, as a society, as a human race.
yeah.
And yet we have never been so profoundly lacking and alone. And I feel there's this mass revival coming together towards a belief in God and a worldview which says, my life was made to give to others. And it's just so exciting. And I'm seeing people that I never, like I had a buddy of mine from high school, I would have never thought would become a believer. And he gives me a ring and he's like, yeah, no, just, I was done with everything, got everything I wanted in the world, and going to mass now, bro. And I'm like,
Okay.
oh, amazing, And this is not the first guy. It's just been like, I've been seeing this happen for like probably 3 years, and I've been paying attention to it. And I think there's just a profound ache in our culture for something more, for the adventure.
What do you think is prompting it?
Pain.
Say more.
Pain. I'm a huge believer that few of us learn without experiencing some pain ourselves. I think it is wisdom to be able to learn from other people's experiences in pain and actually practice that and implement it into our life. I think most of us need to be sufficiently bruised and burned before we really wake up to these greater realities. And so I think it's all count it all as good, right? It's all for God's greater glory, the reality that we are slowly falling apart at a larger societal, cultural level, because I think it's providing opportunities for people to plunge the depths and have an authentic experience with God. But I think
go
it
there.
takes pain.
Yeah, well, let's go there for a second. So, authentic experience with God. There's a book I'm reading right now called Mysticism by, hold on, let me see if I can remember the name of this lady. I just discovered her through a Twitter reference actually the other day.
Oh, no way.
Evelyn Underhill, I think. Yeah. Anyhow, and so she's got this whole book that's like a breakdown of like, what is mysticism? Where does it go off the rails? How should we understand it in a helpful way? Anyhow, she ended up having a really helpful line that I went to highlight where she said, a lot of people think, or mysticism as a word has been co-opted by so many. to mean all sorts of different things, especially today. And then she says it's got a really simple definition. It means direct contact with divine reality, or with the divine.
Wow. That's super solid.
So that being said, now she didn't, I'm sort of inferring this from the rest of what she's saying and from just
Right.
what we know about how all of this stuff works. Direct contact with the divine doesn't mean that you understand it. It doesn't mean that how you internalize it and try to communicate it actually makes sense, because there are a ton of mystics in plenty of other religions who have had direct contact with the divine and then are like, how do I make sense of this in terms of culture that I live in, and the symbols and the sigils and the words and the thoughts that, because there's a line from Father Richard Rohr I really like. He says, how we see is what we see. Actually, that goes back to what you said at the beginning, your bias and stuff. Me too, right? How you see the world is, or what you see is how you see. How you see is what you see. What you choose to bring in, what you choose to pay attention to. And I'm curious to go that line of you're talking about mysticism. You said you've enjoyed following them or learning from them. What are your formation? Like, who are you reading? I am assuming, because you work full time, right, in making films and movies and trailers and stuff. So I'm assuming you're doing a bunch of reading and stuff on the side and reflection. And who are you reading, or who's been really formative whenever you can get to it?
Sure. Well, I think my background, I was fortunate enough to spend 2 years in a diocesan seminary, and I
Oh,
had
wow.
some really good professors. My professor of the history of philosophy was just incredible. He's my first teacher who quizzed us all through the oral method, the oral tradition. And we'd have to read the great books, the great works in order, right? Starting all the way from the Greeks and Plato, and kind of going through medieval philosophy and then Christian thought and a little bit of Aquinas. But I was only there for 2 years, so I don't know much. I don't know a lot, but that really informed my worldview. And then also praying through some books of the Desert Fathers. St. John of the Cross is someone that I'm excited to spend more time with and learn more from, like the great mystic who brought a lot of sense to suffering, which I think is important for me and important to all of us. How do we make sense of suffering? And then I think probably my own bias is, probably I naively like the idea of mysticism because I grow up in the time I do now, and I'm a musician and a creative and love seeing parallels in things and love things left unanswered. And I find that points to the goodness of God and how big the world is and how little I know. And so that's kind of informed the way I think. But also, I would say when it comes to reading now, it's actually been my wife who's inspired me to pick up reading some more. And she gave me as a gift a couple months ago these awesome books, some of them in the real world and some of them fiction, that just point towards the masculine heart. And I'm reading the one I'm reading right now is just the story of the USS Indianapolis, and how it sank, and all of the shark attacks and craziness. And I've been loving reading that right now because I read it every night, and I feel like I go to bed and I'm in this dream state as if I'm there, just thinking about this story and how would I respond to that amount of suffering, Would I be one of these young men who just basically jumps off the raft, totally prepared to meet their end? Or would where would my limit be for hope itself? Because if we lose hope, we fall victim to despair. And despair for long enough is the end. So I've been kind of wrestling with those kinds of things and just enjoying some authentically good stories of history. And she's given me about 15 books I have to get through.
Oh
So I don't
gosh.
know how long that's going to take, but
Okay.
I've really been enjoying it. Sorry for that long answer
No,
to your
that's
question.
what a great answer. You've mentioned the word hope, and this is something I'm routinely interested in or curious about. Is how do I say this? Sort of the question is, what do you have hope in for the future? Now, I want to say you're not allowed to pull the God card.
Yeah. Okay.
You were roughly, I think, about the same age here. I'm
Yeah.
36. And so maybe there's some more gas in the can. We're here for a couple more years. We're trying to raise families. We're looking at the future of our countries and our cultures and stuff. And if you follow legacy media, we're 2 bad days short of apocalypse. And it's been that way for a century now. But we still got to live in this thing. And we're still trying to build a future that makes sense, where we actually maybe look forward to it, or can, not be afraid of what tomorrow brings for our
Right.
little ones, and so on. I'm curious, do you have anything that you have seen, or news that you've heard, stuff like that, that goes, maybe something good can possibly happen, or this is going to open up something totally cool? And this can be totally disconnected to everything else we've talked about, but what things bring you hope?
Yeah, and not pulling the God card.
Yeah.
So I will just say culturally, I'm very filled with hope. Seeing so many people, whether it be online personalities, friends I know of, or people in my community here in Canada, who are running towards Catholicism or Orthodoxy, a way of life, a code, a rubric, something to follow that's actually hard. That gives me great hope, because I feel like that's a sign that our culture is in its final throes and swings of revealing its true hand. And I think that's an opportunity. So I'm very inspired by that. Yeah, I have hope for how we've progressed as a as a society. The amount of new things happening, all the way from Elon Musk's, they landed that
Yeah, the
what
rocket
was it
just the
called?
other day.
The rocket, yeah,
Yeah.
caught it in midair. Like that's fascinating. That's amazing. That's really cool stuff. You know, I'm gonna butcher his name, but I think it's is it something Longberg? He's
Oh, Bjorn Longberg?
Bjorn
He
Lomberg.
advises the UN or something?
Yeah, well, just his study of just how far we've come, and that we're actually doing
Agreed.
a pretty good job with the environment and climate
Yeah.
and all of that. But you can look at wrong skews for data, and you can embrace the position of a pessimist who thinks that everything's over. What's the sense of trying? I remember before I got married, I went on this date with this girl who said, yeah, I love children, but I would never bring a child into this world, because we live in a profoundly sad state of affairs. And, with that, the date was over. And that's sad. So I try not to take that kind of position. I'm filled with great hope and optimism, but I am an optimist, right? I love
Okay.
to see the silver lining in things. And I think it's actually good mental hygiene for myself, because I want to take a position. I want to orient my mind towards positivity, towards seeing the good, and to turn pain and suffering, hopefully, into a sense of purpose. It's just a better way to live for me.
Yeah. I agree with that. And you're right about, I loved his, I think I've only seen him chat with Jordan Peterson. He'll just
Yeah,
talk about,
same.
this is lunch money for a billionaire to do this one thing out of a list of 15, and it would have dramatic impact on the lives of either a first world or a third world country, or just different people around, members of the human family. It's to realize that, like, this is where we are right now, where you could just spend this amount of money and have this kind of astronomical impact for the future of the human family. Like, yeah, that's an exciting time to, and then the question is like, well, what does it take to do that? Like Mr. Beast just, I don't know, he raised a couple of million to clean the oceans or something. Like, man, there's a whole nother conversation about what sort of fun could be had that could also, be good. Anyhow, maybe
But it
there's a
brings
follow
up
up.
it brings up that one thing. Just so one small aside is
Yeah,
that
totes. Go ahead.
it points to the fact that we all have agency,
Mm-hmm.
and that to say that these problems are too big to solve, that what's the use in building a family? What's the use in trying? What's the use in having hope?
Mm-hmm.
We take ourselves out of the fight, literally, you know. And when we take ourselves out of the fight, we create that culture which causes despair.
Yep.
But when we see our agency and ability to do things and do positive things, to do good,
Mm-hmm.
I think, how can that not fill you up with hope?
Mm-hmm.
We're
I think
alive today.
agreed. I think it is not only an amazing time to be alive, but there's also, and that's a whole nother conversation. Maybe it'd be fun to have you come back and just chat about, like, with all the tech that we have now, the fact that the people like the middle class with a bold enough idea and finding some creative way to create a runway for success can actually do stuff that's insanely cool that nobody else has ever been able to do in the history of mankind. That's a whole
Yeah.
nother conversation. As we start to wrap, I want to ask, what is a show maybe? I mean, you started mentioning a book that you've been reading recently that really has impressed you. But if you were to think of like a movie maybe that you've watched last year or
Recently.
so that you really maybe were surprised how much you liked or thought, hey, this is really good, or there's a really good message, or,
Yeah.
what would you pick?
Yeah. I really like, I think it's called A Hidden Life by Terrence Malick.
Okay, I haven't seen that.
Amazing. It's about the peril this one gentleman in, I think Austrian,
Okay.
as Hitler's Germany is growing more and more powerful, and he is in a moral conflict, and he has to choose. And it's done so well. I've always loved Terrence Malick's cinematography. His
Okay.
people are either going to love it or hate it. Like if you can watch a slow burn and just fall in love with the way that the composition of that shot was, and a limited dialogue piece, you'll love it. If you think that's way too artsy, for your listeners, don't watch it.
There are no listeners. It's just me. This is my channel.
Okay.
I think the last thing he did, Thin Red Line, right?
Let me see.
Back in the 90s was like this amazing all-star cast. Jim Caviezel was a young guy in it.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's the most recent one I've seen
Okay.
by him. Very much
Tree
what
of
you're talking
Life,
about.
To the Wonder. Oh
Also
my
haven't
gosh.
seen those. I need to cue those up.
That could become the trailer for at least to Tree of Life or To the Wonder. There's this big astral montage in it, and yeah, you should just put that in this, rip it and put it in this this video wherever it goes, and yeah, people will be fully, like, spoiler alert, aware that we've talked about a bunch of things, and I'm a bit of a space cadet.